بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. قال الله تعالى في كتابه العزيز بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما صلى الله عليه وسلم. After his trip to Sham, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam returns to Mecca. And he returned to Mecca, and one of the first things that he wanted to do in his return is to find a way to help Abu Talib support his family. Because remember from last week, we talked about how Abu Talib had a very large family and how these business trips were crucial for him to make income, and he had to essentially cut his business trip short after him, Rasulullah ﷺ, and their encounter with Buhayra the monk. So the focus of today's class is going to be talking about Rasulullah ﷺ and his journey as a teenager, who he was as a teenager. And what's so beautiful about the life of Rasulullah ﷺ is that, again, an individual who lived 1400 years ago still remains relevant to this day. The same issues with teenagers that we see today are the same issues that Rasulullah ﷺ had to deal with as a teenager and amongst his friends, amongst his peers. Right? And so nowadays we constantly hear, what about the youth? What are we going to do with the youth, right? The youth. And what you'll see is that much of the problems that we see today with youth growing up and children growing up and how to protect them and what's the balance between sheltering and the balance between exposing them to the world so that they can, operate in a world. Where do we find these things? We can find in the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And even when you read ancient Arabic poetry that's about 1500 years old, you see the poets are talking about the insanity or the loss of sense that comes with being a young person. So during the time of Nubuwwah, there were situations, that were very difficult for Rasulullah ﷺ in terms of managing the youth sometimes. It wasn't all easy for Rasulullah ﷺ when he was a leader. And not to jump ahead so much, but two quick examples of this is, there's a story of a young man who went to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and he loved Islam, he loved Rasulullah, he loved Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but there was one desire that he had that was very difficult for him to hold back, and so he asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam if he can make an exception for him to commit zina. And so Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is dealing with a young man whose desires are intense, as we talked about last week as well, this is the important time for individuals to have role models to show how we control and navigate these hormones. And so Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, instead of giving him that permission, he empathized with him, and then he taught him a lesson in a very emotionally intelligent manner by asking him, do you have a mother? He said, yes. Do you have a sister? He said, yes. And so in response, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told him that, how would you feel if somebody committed zina with your mother or your sister? And so it put into perspective for him. Right, put into perspective for this young individual that this is indeed a very heinous sin, and so it caused him to hold back. There's another incident where at the time of the Battle of Uhud, where after the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ received news that the Quraysh, the enemies, were near the city of Medina, so he held a council meeting. And so the Prophet's personal inclination was that he wanted to remain inside of Medina and defend the city from there. And this was also the senior Sahaba's inclination, to remain inside Medina, to have this defensive approach. On the other hand, there were many younger Sahaba who did not participate in the Battle of Badr. And anybody that participated in the Battle of Badr was like a legend. The legend of Badr, right? Everybody knew about Badr. And so the Battle of Badr was such a huge manifestation of Allah's power and grandeur. So anyone who wasn't there wanted to be a part of something like that. So the younger Sahaba who weren't part of Badr, what did they want? No, we got to go out there. We got to go out there and meet them in the battlefield so we can have our Battle of Badr experience. Waiting for that next opportunity. They felt they had missed out. So the younger Sahaba became so riled up and so excited that the Prophet ﷺ ended up saying, all right, we'll go outside. Afterwards, the younger Sahaba kind of came to realization that they may have pushed the Prophet ﷺ too far. They may have pushed the Prophet ﷺ to do something that he didn't want to do. So they came to the Prophet ﷺ and apologized and said, we'll stay in Medina if you want. He said, once a prophet has worn the armor, then we shall continue. فَإِذَا عَزَمْتَ فَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ. That once you make a decision about something, once you are certain about something, you make a decision about it, tawakkul ala Allah. And so they went. Right? And I won't spoil what happens at the Battle of Uhud. We'll get there, inshallah. But one thing to put into perspective is, alhamdulillah, most of the people here are older, young professionals, maybe some people are even parents. One thing to put into perspective is that never underestimate the power that you have in manifesting the potential of a youth. So what I mean by that is that if we treat our youth like they have high potential, like they are intelligent people, like they do have capabilities of being great, and we treat them that way, then they will become great. There have been studies that have been done where teachers will be given groups of students. And they'll be given a mix of a group of students. Some of them are gifted, some of them might be average or whatever it may be. And they'll tell some of the teachers that this group is the gifted group. And it's just a random group of students. And they'll say that this other group is not the gifted group. The attention and care they gave to the gifted group allowed the so-called gifted group to succeed more in their academics than the non-gifted group. But it was all because of that personal bias that these individuals had already, that these people had potential. These people have the ability to be successful. So if you stop treating kids like kids and start treating them like adults, you're going to find very amazing results. And this is so profound because in our deen, we have two age groups. You're either baligh or ghayr baligh. You're either an adult or you're not an adult. This idea of teenager does not exist in Islam. Once you hit puberty, you're an adult. You start doing adult things. You start interacting with the real world. You start being educated by adults. And that builds maturity. One thing about the modern day school system, which, is understandable, why people do what they do. But during the Prophet ﷺ's time, growing up as a teenager, he was very involved in the world. They were constantly roaming the streets. They were constantly interacting with business. They were interacting with adults. So it built their maturity very quickly. Not just mentally and emotionally, but also physically. Growing up in a desert requires you to build strength very early on. And so in current day, in order to have structure, what they do is they put people into grades or age groups. But what happens is that significantly slows down the maturity process of people. So now we sit here 1400 years later marveling at the fact that somebody during the time of the Prophet ﷺ can get married at 12, 13 years old and have a child at 12, 11 years old and be a parent, and it was completely normal and nobody batted an eye. And now we're like, huh? How? It's really simple. They interacted with the world at a very young age. Once you hit puberty, you're an adult now. You got to do adult things. You got to learn how to be an adult. And we're going to help you do that. And so the more you interact with people older than you, the more you're able to mature a lot quicker. But so he, Rasulullah ﷺ, was not sheltered, but he was protected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ did indeed interact with the world around him. And the world around him wasn't the best world around him. Just like we see today. There's a lot of things that are un-Islamic going on in our world. Does that mean that we just go inside and lock ourselves in? No. We still have a duty to interact with the world. But he was protected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so, real quickly, I want to talk about something called Ismatul Anbiya, right, which is a theological point about the prophets and the messengers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are protected by Allah from falling into any reprehensible behavior. So there are a few prophets, who have committed actions and they were divinely decreed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order for us to teach us a lesson. So Adam and Eve, alayhim salam, eating from the tree where they weren't supposed to, this was divinely decreed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It was always going to happen. Right? We don't believe in something called original sin, or Eve is at fault for the original sin, and that type of stuff. That's not an Islamic concept. But this happened divinely by the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order to teach us a lesson about how to repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or Musa alayhi salam, when he had a confrontation with a man who was treating his servant very poorly, and this confrontation ended up with Musa alayhi salam accidentally killing that man. Right? There was lessons there that happened. Or when Abdullah ibn Maktoum, the blind Sahabi, went to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam with a question, and the Prophet ﷺ was a little bit annoyed because he interrupted the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. There was a lesson that was given to us there. So all these things that happened by the Prophets, they were divinely decreed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order for us to have little lessons and teach us these profound reflection points and lessons there. So for the most part, the Prophets are dignitaries of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They were protected from bad behavior. They were protected. There's a certain sanctity and purity over their message. And this had to be because لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رُسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. That indeed, in the Messenger of Allah is an excellent example. So let's talk about some incidents that happened during the period where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is going from boy to young adult, young man. One day, there was young Muhammed Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam who was playing with rocks with other boys around his age. And they were playing some sort of game where they were setting up structures with the rocks, and there was some type of game that was happening. And the traditional clothing of those days was a two-piece garment. You would have a lower garment, like a lungi or an izar, and it would cover your lower body. Then there was an upper garment that would cover your upper body. Right? Yeah, it's basically like ihram. You know the Hujjaj, when they go to Hajj and there's the ihram, the two pieces? That's basically what the common garment was during the time of the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. However, young boys would be given one garment, and they would wrap it around the chest so that they could run around and play. And young boys as well, they would constantly get it dirty, they would rip it up, they would destroy their clothes. So, these things are not cheap. So parents, they wouldn't give their young boys two pieces of garment so that they can, have more clothes in the future. Now they were playing around with these rocks, but some of the rocks were very heavy and sharp. And so the boys were unable to carry them in their hands. So some of the boys, because they had no problem with it, and it wasn't considered weird, they just take off their garment, right? Nothing underneath, just freedom. And they would take these garments and they would place a bunch of rocks on it, and they would, sling the garment over their shoulder, and they would carry it as almost kind of like a backpack or like a knapsack. And so as a result, they're completely uncovered. And they were kids. They didn't really see a problem with this. However, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like I said, not sheltered but protected. So he's interacting with these kids, but he himself never felt comfortable doing this. Never felt comfortable taking his clothes off. So he just used his hands to carry them, and his hands would get cut up and bruised up. And so the other boys would urge him, come on, man, you see what we're doing? It's easy. It's easier this way. It's just for a little while. There's nothing really wrong with it. People do it all the time. At that time, we talked about in the very beginning of these sessions, at that time, people would be making tawaf. And one of the things that they would do is they would do tawaf nude. It's a very common practice. So it wasn't a big deal. And so here we see something that, again, children and teenagers especially constantly deal with: peer pressure, right? And the influence of peer pressure. So he said, okay, you know what? Everybody's doing it. No one seems to have a problem with it. Maybe I'm just the one thinking that it's wrong, but maybe it's actually not that wrong. Okay, no biggie, I'll do it. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what he does is he starts to remove his garments to put the rocks in. Just starts to do it. And the narration says that he felt like he got slapped hard in the back of his head. And he didn't see anybody smack him in the head. And then he heard a voice said, "Shudda alayka izarak." Put your izar back on. And he was a kid. And in that situation, what would you do? Somebody just smacked you upside the head and yelled at you, "Yes, sir." Had no idea who it was, though. And so Rasulullah ﷺ put his izar back on. Then he just carried the rocks with his hands, even if they were heavy, even if they were painful. But he didn't take off his garment. Now there's another incident that's very similar, narrated by the uncle of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, Al-Abbas. So now Rasulullah ﷺ is a little bit older. Now he's in his mid-teens. And there was an incident that caused the Kaaba to need to be renovated. There was a flood. So the Kaaba needed to be renovated. And so everyone wanted to get in on this renovation, because the Kaaba was a special place. One thing that the Quraysh did very well was uphold the sanctity of the Kaaba. Although there was a lot of messed up things that were happening around the Kaaba, there was even idols around the Kaaba. One thing that they did is they really had sanctity for the Kaaba itself. That this is from Ibrahim alayhi salam, from our forefather Ibrahim. And so everyone wanted a piece of the action. So all the high-ranking family members of Quraysh, they were given the first preference to renovate. So in this case, Banu Hashim, the clan of the Prophet ﷺ, they were given, special preference of renovating the Kaaba. And Al-Abbas was there. Abbas was there, and he was carrying these rocks, he was carrying these bricks to renovate the Kaaba. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was also one of the first ones to carry the rocks and carry the bricks. And at this time as well, all the men of the Quraysh, they started competing with one another. Who can carry more rocks? Who can carry the biggest rock? Trying to display their manhood, right? The bigger rock you carry, the bigger the man you are. The more weight you lift, the more man you are, right? Where's Ryan? Is Ryan here? No? He's not here. Okay. He would have loved that. So, in order to help them do that, men were removing their lower garment and they would adjust their upper cloth so that they're not completely exposed, but there was still a chance of being exposed. And they wrapped up the rocks and bricks with their lower garment. They would sling it over their shoulder. And Rasulullah ﷺ, he was struggling to carry one of these heavy bricks. And so his uncle Al-Abbas, he came and suggested to Rasulullah ﷺ, his nephew, to use the lower garment to carry the rocks. And so the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he started to remove his lower garment. Just, again, started to remove. Didn't even do it. Just started to. And then all of a sudden, what happened? Rasulullah ﷺ collapsed. Passed out. And his eyes rolled up. And then he opened his eyes and he stares into the sky for some time. And he stood up and he said, "Izari, Izari, where's my izar? Where's my izar?" And he put his izar back on. So at best, he pulls his nephew aside and he's like, "Yo, you're acting kind of weird. What's wrong?" And the Prophet ﷺ said, I have been forbidden from walking around not fully clothed. I've been told not to expose my body in public. I'm not going to expose my body in public. So again, we see not sheltered, interacting with the world, but protected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Teaching us what? A very beautiful lesson here that you can uphold your Islamic values without needing to shelter yourself. It can be done. And so Abu Talib, he was not a wealthy person. He had a very large family. Many were dependent on him. And we see in his mid-teens, Rasulullah ﷺ, he develops maturity very, very early on. He wants to help his uncle. As teenagers, what were we thinking? We were thinking, my parents have got it. They got the bills. They'll make the car payments. They'll keep the lights on. They'll figure it out. I just got to do my thing and focus. I just got to go ball with my friends at the YMCA at 8 p.m. and my parents will figure it out. But Rasulullah ﷺ, he wanted to help. He had that maturity. He wanted to figure it out. He wanted to figure out any way that he could do to start helping his family. Didn't matter what it was. I'll do the most low task if I had to. Halal, of course, right? I will do the most, physically labor task if I had to support my family, to support the family of Abu Talib, who has taken such care of me since my mother and my father and my grandmother or grandfather have all passed away. So he starts to search how he can help his family. Now here's one problem though. Rasulullah ﷺ is from which clan? Yeah, Quraysh is the overall clan, but there's the specific clan in Quraysh. Banu Hashim, yes. So he's from Banu Hashim, and Banu Hashim is seen as a very noble tribe amongst the Quraysh. So for someone from Banu Hashim to do menial tasks like physical labor, it wasn't becoming of the men of Quraysh. Because the men of Quraysh had prestige. The men of Quraysh, they were merchants. They would go to Sham, they would go to Yemen, they were successful businessmen. So it was looked down upon for someone like the Prophet ﷺ to take up something like construction or carpentry or being a deliverer, etc. And so Rasulullah ﷺ, he wanted to take on business. He was a young man. And he looked up to his uncle, Abu Talib. But Abu Talib wasn't having any of it. He said, no, you're not going to go into business. Why? Well, we talked about it last week. Business requires travel. Travel was off limits for Rasulullah ﷺ. Because after the incident with Buhayra, the Buhayra telling his uncle that this man is a prophet, you need to protect him, people are coming for him, people are going to try to persecute him, people are going to try to kill him. So Abu Talib had full lockdown on the Prophet ﷺ. No, you're not traveling. We got to protect you. So that wasn't an option. So there was only one type of work that was left that was acceptable for a child of an elite family to do. And that was shepherding. Shepherding. Because shepherding, although it was a very difficult task, it required a lot of labor, it was attributed with good leadership and good qualities. That if you were a shepherd, it means you developed very good skills, very good leadership, and very good qualities. There's a report in Sahih Bukhari where Rasulullah ﷺ says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not send any prophet but that he cared for sheep. Every prophet was a shepherd at some point in their life. And the companions asked, and you as well, Ya Rasulullah? He said, yes, I was a shepherd. I was a shepherd. I was, very modest in wage. I would work really hard on behalf of the people of Mecca, and I would make like pennies. And so the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ would work and work and work, but he would be given small amounts for his work, but everything counted. And so one time the companions were traveling with Rasulullah ﷺ, and they came across a tree that had mushrooms, right? Not the psychedelics, okay? And they were picking at the mushrooms, and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, pick the black ones because they're more tasty. And so they asked him, Ya Rasulullah, how do you know that? And he says, my days as a shepherd, I would come across these trees. When I'm hungry, I would take some of these mushrooms and eat them. Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah, in his Adab al-Mufrad, he says that Rasulullah ﷺ said that Musa alayhi salam was sent as a prophet and he was a shepherd. Dawood alayhi salam was sent as a prophet and he was a shepherd. And I was sent as a prophet and I was a shepherd. Now we have reports where Isa alayhi salam, before leaving his disciples, he said shepherd well, to lead his people well. And what he meant by shepherd well was not shepherd sheep. He meant literally like lead the people well after he's gone. So Rasulullah ﷺ used to take his animals to graze in a place called Ajyad. And when we look at these few years of Rasulullah ﷺ's life as a shepherd, we learn a lot of lessons. First is that this position, although, in terms of capability and skill, was something that required a lot of skill, a lot of leadership, it wasn't a respected position. You could do better. But Rasulullah ﷺ was willing to do what needed to be done to help his family. Which shows that even from an early age, Rasulullah ﷺ is not looking for prestige. And again, everything in the life of Rasulullah ﷺ is divinely decreed. Nothing in the life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ up until Nubuwwah has ever indicated that he wants prestige. Even in Nubuwwah, there's nothing that indicates that he wants prestige. But this is important because when he's about to establish his Nubuwwah, nobody can make that claim. Because that's a characteristic that is unbecoming of a prophet. And specifically, when we've seen Rasulullah ﷺ grow up, he has never expressed or showed that he's looking for prestige. He's always looking to serve. He's always willing to go back to the basics to do what needed to be done. And so Rasulullah ﷺ said to his companions that it's better for you to cut wood than for you to sit and beg. Right? There's a beauty with working with your hands in our deen. It's beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, Al-Kasibu Habibullah. That the one who earns with his hands is beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because the reality is once someone gets used to handouts, or they're living from fundraiser to fundraiser, that fundraiser life, go fund me, go fund my trip. Right? I want to go to Hawaii for spring break, go fund my trip. Share my link on Facebook. You begin to lose the drive to earn for yourself, to earn for our family. And when we lose the drive to earn, then it creates someone to lose appreciation for the wealth that we have in our hands. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is training these prophets from an early point on how to work hard, but particularly how to manage. If you ever are in a position where you have to manage animals without them speaking your language, it's very tough. Right? People barely can get their cats to do what they want to do. I have this neighbor in our apartment right now who just got a husky. And poor woman. She can't have that husky do anything. We're just sitting in the living room, and all of a sudden we just hear her yelling at her husky in the hallway all the time. So that's just one animal. I imagine an entire flock of sheep, right? And it requires a lot of patience. You got to be patient with them. Sheep, goats, they don't make the most pleasing sounds. Very loud screams, very loud sounds. So you got to have a lot of patience. You got to guide them. You got to guide them on where to go, where to graze, how to get back home. You cannot stay complacent. If you're complacent too long, the wolf might get the sheep. The sheep might scatter. So you have to be on alert. You have to know how to protect your sheep from any predators, from any outside forces. You need to be able to find out, where can I feed my sheep? What things are poisonous to them? What things are healthy for them? You got to worry about the health. And there's a balance, keeping the herd together. And so all this, it creates humbleness. It creates softness within an individual. And so there's a saying where people say that the way one treats an animal is the way one will treat a human being. That it always translates. It's always going to translate. So someone once asked Umar radiallahu ta'ala an, how did you become a great Khalifa? How did you become a great leader, Amir al-Mu'mineen? The term Amir al-Mu'mineen did not exist until the time of Umar al-Khattab radiallahu an. He was the first person to be given that title. He had rule over Egypt, Northern Africa, Persian, Roman empires. The Islamic empire up until this point had never been larger than it was under the Khilafah of Umar radiallahu an. And what he said, I learned how to manage people by managing my camels. At the same time that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was growing up as a shepherd, Umar radiallahu an was also growing up as a shepherd, but he was herding camels, not sheep. He said, my father was a very harsh man. Umar radiallahu an would say this about his father. He would make me work until I was exhausted. He would make me work until my breaking point. And when I did not get the job done, he would beat me. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ and Umar al-Khattab, they were doing the same things. And many years later, Umar radiallahu an would be the sign and the shield of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Both are being prepared to lead the greatest ummah that this world had ever seen. And so one may wonder that of all the realities of the universe and what is beyond it and knowledge of mankind and all that is concerned, that was like suddenly poured into the hearts of the prophets without any prior systematic preparation. The answer is, of course not. That's not how it worked. Even though the prophets did not acquire knowledge by the same means and laws that we do, like the prophets received revelation in different ways, they also were the most intellectual in terms of ability and thinking and reasoning. which is why they were chosen as prophets, which is why they were created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as prophets and divinely decreed to be prophets. They were at the forefront of all educated people. So Umar radiallahu anhu, there was a story where he was passing by an area and he starts to tear up. He starts to cry. And the people around him asked him, like, what's wrong? And he says, this is the place where I used to take my camels grazing. One day I returned late and my dad, he saw all the camels were scattered. And so he beat me until I became red. And it's very interesting that Umar ibn Khattab, he shares this story towards the end of his life because he's passing by this area where this incident happened. He remembers it, and he particularly says, I remember what my father told me. He says, my father told me that I would never amount to anything. That how could you lead anybody if you can't even lead these camels? And now look at him towards the end of his life as Amir al-Mu'mineen. But Umar radiallahu anhu, he said that I had to find balance in these camels. When I focus on one, I lose track of the herd. But when I focus on the herd, I lose track of the individual needs. So you need to find a balance. It's very deep. The scholars say that this statement by Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu unlocks how to lead anything. Communities, family, work, brothers, friends. Each individual person in your circle or your flock has an individual personality. Not all cats are the same. Not all sheep are the same. Not all camels are the same. My wife and I, we like to foster cats. So since we've been fostering cats, I think we've had like 3 or 4 cats that we've fostered. None of them are the same. Each one crazier than the last, right? But they're all cats. So being a shepherd of sheep, it requires one to be simultaneously soft and tender, as well as brave and courageous. And this tenderness is needed for one's own flock. And bravery is essential when defending the flock against wolves and other predatory animals. So being a shepherd, it necessitates humility. It necessitates contentment, strength. It's hard, it's labor. It's very difficult to develop arrogance and pride as a shepherd of a sheep. So the mandating of prophets in this role provides an important lesson in our understanding of honor and nobility. That it teaches that we should be proud and happy to earn money with our own hands to feed our families, our communities, just as Rasulullah ﷺ and the prophets before us did. And by being a shepherd, it offers the opportunity of solitude, which is so crucial for a prophet, which encourages reflection, it encourages introspection. You ever a lot of you know that I studied at Qalam, right? And a lot of my teachers, they have their halaqas online or their posts and things like that. Nowadays, there's people who are even clipping them into reels and putting them all over the place. I can't get away from Sheikh Mikhail. I can't get away from him. Every time I scroll, his face is on my feed. I see him all day in class, and then I got to see him on my social medias too. And he's always dropping bars, right? Everyone's like, oof, that was deep. You know how that, you know what that comes from? It's not a secret. He just reflects. He just tells you, I just sit at home for 2 hours, just close my eyes and just reflect. And that's where these bars come from. It just comes from reflection. Intellect, maturity, introspection, right? Wisdom. It just comes from reflection. Solitude. And so there's a clear correlation here between the prophets being given solitude and the prophets also being very wise and reflective and introspective as well. And what's interesting as well is even current day today, the faith of farmers and shepherds and those who are largely surrounded by nature and in solitude is so much higher than the faith of people in affluent urban communities, in cities and hustle and bustle. Because people in downtown Seattle, we don't even have time to think. But when you go into the farm, you go to shepherd, you go into nature, now you have time to think. Time to just reflect. Can't get any phone service on top of the mountains that everybody's always going to now. It just causes you to reflect. What's the ayah in the Quran? Surah Al-Imran. I'm forgetting the Arabic, but that the believers are those who reflect on the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the earth and the trees. يَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. They think about the creation of the heavens and the earth. And so constantly observing the miraculous nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation impacts one's faith. It impacts their sense of being. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He also chose the sheep as the animal that prophets will shepherd because it's a very humble animal. Right? It's not a fancy animal. Umar ibn Khattab radhiyallahu anhu, right? His shepherding skills are profound and his leadership is profound, but he owned a Ferrari dealership. Right? These camels were expensive. He owned a Ferrari dealership. He owned a luxury car dealership. But the Prophet ﷺ and the other prophets, they owned a, used car. Right? Honda Civic. No offense to any Honda Civic people out there. Inshallah. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, during his time as a shepherd, he also had like shepherd buddies. Right? So he wasn't just the only shepherd in all of Mecca, but there was other shepherds as well. And there was almost like shifts, where it's like, all right, since we can't all send our sheep all out at once, you'll go in the morning and you will do some shepherding here and grazing, and I will go at this time and I will go at this time. So they almost had like shifts. And the Prophet Muhammad, he recalled that he never really had a strong desire to indulge in the typical things that teenage boys take part in. But he did admit that there was a few times where he was kind of curious about these things that people would engage in. And so while they were socializing, sometimes socializing on the job, these young shepherds would often tell each other stories and events of the nights before. Yo, last night was crazy. Last night was a movie, bro. And they're like, oh, you have no idea what happened. I met her, and this happened, and then we did this, and we went there, and then we went to this club and this bar, and somebody got in a fight over here. It was crazy, and he broke his leg over there. I don't know. And then they would ask the Prophet ﷺ, what did you do? I went home and I slept. Didn't really do anything. And so the other people, they were like, man, we're concerned about this Muhammad guy, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's just not having any fun. Let's figure out a way for us to get him out to have some fun. He's a decent guy. We like him. So we want to show him a good time. Right? So one day they told the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, come to our party. You don't have to do anything, just swing by. Just check out the party for a little bit. And again, there's peer pressure. Right? Peer pressure is a big deal during teenage years. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, again, he said that he was curious. So he made the arrangements. He hit up one of his boys and said, yo, can you cover my shift today? He said, yeah, okay. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ gets his shift covered. And he says, let me go check out that party. So later in the evening, the Prophet ﷺ is on his way to the party. And as he got near the house where the party was being held, some narrations say that it was a wedding that occurred, that so-and-so married so-and-so. It's literally a narration. It says Fulan and Fulan. It doesn't, we don't know the names of the individuals. Just so-and-so married so-and-so. And he would hear people are very obviously drunk. They're very rowdy. He could hear women were singing, and there was a lot of instruments that were being played. Many times during this time for entertainment, there was slave girls who were bought purely for the sake of entertainment. That their only job was to just sing and just entertain the people. And they would be rented out for these types of occasions. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he hears all of this as he was outside the house, and he just didn't feel right about it. He was like, something like, this isn't my scene. I shouldn't be here. Now, you'll have to remember one thing, right? At this current time, there's no revelation. So, drinking alcohol and these types of things, they're not made haram yet. Drinking alcohol wasn't made haram till towards the end of the life of the Prophet ﷺ, like, I want to say like 7th, 8th year after Hijrah. Like very, very late. There was a progression that happened. So here, we can't confuse it and say the Prophet ﷺ is going to sin or going to commit fahisha, because that's not what he was going to do. This wasn't seen as wrong, but he was uncomfortable with it. He knew that there was a fitrah that he had. There was a protection by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala he had that taught him that this is something that you should avoid. And so the Prophet ﷺ, hearing all this, he just looks outside the house and he's thinking. And before he could take another step, passes out. And Prophet ﷺ says, I did not wake up until I felt sun on my face. And the party was over. And the next day, the Prophet ﷺ, he goes to work and all his boys are there, and he said, what happened? We thought you were going to come through. He said, I tried to come, but I just fell asleep. Like, man, you're so lame, man, like going to sleep. And so they put more pressure on the Prophet, like, you got to come to this next party. You got to come tonight. The Prophet ﷺ said, I'm working tonight. I said, don't worry, we'll find a guy to cover your shift. You need to come party. You more than anybody need to party. And so with another shepherd covering his shift again the next night, the Prophet ﷺ made his way to that party again that night. And again, he hears the hoopla going on outside. He can hear the loud, obnoxious rowdiness of the partygoers. He's standing there wondering, should I go, should I not? And then before he can take another step forward, what happens? He passes out again. And he woke up with the sun shining on his face. Again, what did I say? Not sheltered, but protected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he went to work that morning, and the other boys said, where were you? You didn't show up again. The Prophet ﷺ said later, I swear by Allah, I had never had desire to go back to something like that, nor did I ever have any effort to go to such type of a scene until Allah blessed me with prophethood. And so Rasulullah ﷺ was protected from these events. He was cognizant of what was going on around him, but he remained pristine by divine decree. So this is important because when the time of prophethood comes and he starts spreading the message, now it's just not some random guy that was locked up in the house for 25, 40 years. But it was someone who interacted with people, knew him. He knew what the people were up to. The people knew that he knew what they were up to. So now it's not like, oh, you're a nobody, we don't know you. But he had the ability to say, I know exactly what you guys are up to. And so this knowledge was relevant to Rasulullah's method of preaching, that he was exposed to these things without reaching the level where he partakes in them due to divine intervention. And so Ibn Ishaq, rahimahullah, in his Seerah, he talks about the youth of the Prophet's upbringing. He says, very beautiful quote, where he says, the Prophet began to mature into a man, and Allah protected him. Allah set up a boundary to protect the Prophet from Jahiliyyah. And Allah intended him to be a noble messenger of God. And the Prophet grew up to the most virtuous among men in his community, and he became the most exemplary man in his community. Allah gave him a noble lineage, and he had the most excellent company in Khadija, Zayd ibn Haritha, Bilal, Abu Bakr, Ali, etc. He had great forbearance. He was the most truthful person in his speech. There was nobody you could trust any more than him. He had such a character that would put other men to shame. He was known by his entire society as Al-Amin. Even people who did not know his name knew him as Al-Amin because of his well-known reputation of his great character. And so the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, again, through divine decree, is given all the tools and all the qualities. When the time of prophethood comes, nobody can deny that this man is a prophet. And we'll get to it. But something like, as I read the narrations of Seerah, like for real, like if we really reflect about it and we read the time of Mecca specifically, where the Prophet ﷺ faces a lot of opposition, it is impossible to think that the Quraysh who opposed the Prophet ﷺ didn't believe in him. 1,000% they believed in him, they just rejected. It was impossible. And you'll see stories. You'll see stories of the leaders of Quraysh just astonished at the Quran, astonished at the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the miracles that are happening. But what was at stake? What was threatened? Their power, their leadership, their ability to oppress whoever they wanted to, their ability to make money off of the most heinous things whenever they wanted to, and live a life of pure luxury. All that was at stake. Admitting your faults, admitting that you are wrong, admitting that you are not a suitable leader and the Prophet ﷺ is the suitable leader. All this was, and they didn't want to give that up. But to say that they didn't believe in the Prophet ﷺ, I just find that far-fetched. Really, like if you look at the narrations, it's very far-fetched that is the case. And we'll get to it when we get to it, but inshallah we will see that the four main leaders of Quraysh used to get caught, used to catch one another, sitting outside the house of the Prophet ﷺ listening to his recitation. And they would see each other like, oh, that Spider-Man meme where everybody's like pointing at each other? And they would run away. And it happened 3 nights in a row. And they met together and they were like, okay, we got to acknowledge the fact that, you saw me, I saw you. What's going on here? I said, he's speaking the truth. This guy is a prophet of Allah for certain, but we can't let the people know that. We can't let the people know that. So it's really hard to believe, especially when you see his character, when you see the fact that there was no bank system in Mecca. So who was the bank? It was him. They would give their possessions, their trusty possessions to the Prophet ﷺ. They trust the Prophet ﷺ more than their own selves. They're like, I know if it's with the Prophet ﷺ, it's going to be in safety. That it's going to be protected. And being truthful, it might be the most important quality of a Muslim. Because our entire deen relies on truthfulness. Our entire deen relies on the truthfulness of the narrators that have narrated this Quran to us. Our entire deen relies on the truthfulness of the narrators of hadith. So sidq is the most important quality of a Muslim. Being someone who is ameen. Sadiqul ameen. And it's even more important these days in a day where we're living in a life of misinformation. Right? Most of what we see on our social media is pure lies and deceit. Curated specifically for you. Here is a fancied up lie that has pillows and candy all around it, and we're feeding it purely just for you. Curated specifically for you. This call-out culture that we're seeing on Twitter and YouTube, everywhere. So-and-so exposed so-and-so, response to so-and-so, so-and-so refuted. Wallahi, it's all trash. Trash. Garbage. Don't listen to that stuff. It's garbage. It's all so-and-so told me that so-and-so said so-and-so, that he said that. And now I'm exposing him. There's a documentary on Netflix called Social Dilemma. Right? If you have Netflix, okay? Astaghfirullah. No, I'm joking. Just if you have Netflix, your homework this week, I'm giving you guys homework this week. Watch that documentary before next class. At least know what's happening. If you choose to use social media to the extent that we do afterwards, that's okay. I'm not your mom or dad, so I'm not your parent. You guys are adults. You can do whatever you want to do. But at least know what's happening. At least know how these things are formed, how these things are curated. At least know the fact that our social media apps are designed by the same designers that design casinos. It's that whole idea of as I'm scrolling, I don't know what's coming up next. I don't know what's going to happen next. It's a gamble. Each scroll is a gamble. Phew, phew, phew. Addiction. It says at least know what's happening. In our deen, we're taught that we want to learn the tricks of shaitan. So that when I get the thoughts in my head, I'm like, I know. That's a trick from shaitan. Right? Now, if I choose to still engage, I'm adult. You're going to answer for what you do. But at least know what's happening. And so the Western world right now, it's crisis mode right now. So much misinformation going on that like people can't control anything. Everything is subjective. Everything is this. Everything is that. Previously, the media had full control over elections. Full control. The media would pump out exactly what they want to feed to the people, and then everybody would just eat it up and then go vote for George Bush or Barack Obama. But then as everybody was pushing Joe Biden, everybody was pushing Hillary Clinton and everything like that, what happened? So many people just, now we're done with it. There's so much misinformation, we don't know who to trust anymore. But guess what? We have a system that has been going on for 1400 years that eliminates all of that. And the muhaddithun have created a perfect system in order to get rid of misinformation. There's a hadith that is narrated. Okay, who narrated it? Is he a trustworthy individual? Is he a righteous individual? Does he lie? Does he have a history of lying? Right? Did we hear this from his mouth directly, or did somebody say that he said it? Because if somebody said he said it and we can't go and directly confirm it with that individual, we're not going to count it as sahih. This right here, this point right here I just made will eliminate 99% of the misinformation on Twitter and YouTube. So-and-so said that? Okay, let's go to him and ask him, did you say that? No? Oh, okay. Does the person have qualifications to be narrating this stuff? Does he have the prerequisites to be narrating this stuff? Right? So there's a system that has already been going on for 1400 years that we have that verifies truthfulness. And all the other societies and groups are trying to figure out, how do we stop misinformation? Just go read up science of hadith. I promise you, you can just implement it in a different way, in a way that fits technology, and it will be the same thing. So now as the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ began to grow older, now from his mid-teens into his young adulthood period, he starts to develop another important skill, and that skill is trade. Right? Now that he's older, he's stronger, something that doesn't get mentioned a lot, which one of my goals of this Seerah class is to kind of talk about aspects of the Prophet ﷺ's life that we may have not engaged in as much. But the Prophet ﷺ was a strong dude. He's a very strong guy, mashallah, Rasulullah ﷺ. So as he grew up and became the man that he was, Abu Talib, he saw this strength, right? He saw that this person was capable of defending himself, capable of being a great warrior, a skilled warrior. So trade and business was something that he started to engage in a little bit more, and the restrictions of Abu Talib kind of lifted a little bit. And he became very good at it as well. And it's beautiful because when you look at the world of business, there's so much da'wah in business. Mecca was a hub, a center of business. So there was so much da'wah that would happen there. When you have business, you have da'wah. Because people, they got to make money. People got to make money. So people will flock to where business is. And so if you can put da'wah in business, then you're going to have a lot of amazing things. That's why Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah was so successful in his lifetime. Because he was a businessman. Not only was he a businessman, but he was also a businessman that interacted with a lot of non-Muslim countries. And so his da'wah went very far. It's why his madhab even today is the most followed madhab. Right? So it's beautiful. And we see it even today, right? As much as I just bashed on online, most of business is happening online nowadays. And where do we see most of da'wah? Also online. Right? Now, mashallah, we have here, I don't know how many people, but we have a few people here for halaqah. But you go online and you see another halaqah online, you'll see what, like 37,000 views. A six-figure amount of views. So there's a lot of da'wah that is happening online as well, because that's because business is also transferred online. So the Prophet ﷺ was involved with business. Another reason why this is an important skill is because it helps you interact with the element of greed. Right? Young people, they don't know true greed until they get that first paycheck and they see FICO and they're like, who the heck is that guy? They see tax, who's tax? That's supposed to be mine. My name's not tax. And so you don't, when you start the first paycheck, somebody starts interacting with this element of greed. And that's why there's a lot of potential for reward in business, but there's also a lot of potential for harm in business as well. So Rasulullah ﷺ, he said the most disliked person to Allah is the one who argues a lot. And the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned a specific virtue for the one who accepts returns. Right? May Allah have mercy on the one who accepts returns of products. So you give somebody a product, it's a very good product, they go and it comes back broken, and you're 99.9% sure that they're the ones that broke it, and they come return it. You're just like, no problem, akhi. Give it back and give them the money back, and just may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on that individual. Because greed is a very hard thing to get over. But again, if you're going to be a prophet of Allah, not only are you going to have to interact with only the good in the world, but you're also going to have to interact with the evil of the world to know how to combat it. But again, because he's divinely protected, it's never to the point where he's actually committing the actions himself. You know that hadith I just mentioned about the special virtue of one that accepts returns? It's actually very funny and beautiful. There's a story of a companion who opened a storefront, and his business was going very well for years. And all of a sudden he closed it. And the companions were like, why did you close up shop? Your business was super successful. You had a great product. And he said, I only opened this business for one purpose and one purpose only. And it's to get this virtue. After years, because I have such a great product, finally somebody came and asked for a return, and I said yes, just so I can get this virtue. Now that it's done, I can close up shop. Right? It's beautiful. You know, sometimes we come across narrations, every narration that you can do amal on, that you can do the action of it, do it, even if it's just one time. That sincerity of seeing Rasulullah ﷺ said this, I'm going to do it. Even if it's just one time. That sincerity, inshallah, that could be your salvation. Wallahu ta'ala alam. Allah da'wah in business. You know, I'm convinced by my readings of the life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that he was truly the most special of people that ever existed. He was clear thinking. He was keen in his perception. He was living with an open heart in the depths of the desert. He was the sober one amongst drunkards. He was the intelligent one against negligent people. Before or after tending to sheep. And before or after going into trade. And before and after revelation. What time is it? 8:50. Two quick stories, inshallah. And we'll be done. Ayman, the Abyssinian woman who played a motherly role in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, narrates that there was once an idol by the name of Buwana, which the Quraysh used to honor and sacrifice animals for. So once a year, they would shave their heads, they would spend a whole day there, and Abu Talib used to attend this with his people. And he would ask the Prophet ﷺ to participate in this festival, but the Prophet ﷺ always refused. Until one day, Abu Talib got angry with him. And he said that also his paternal aunts were also furious with him for his continuous refusal. And they said to him that we fear for you that you're avoiding our idols. Do not want to attend your people's festival and increase their numbers. And so eventually, due to their insistence, he went with them. But on their way there, they lost sight of him for a while. Then suddenly he returned filled with fear. And his aunts asked him, what happened? And he replied that I fear I have been touched, harmed by shaitan. And his aunt said, no, Allah would never trial you with shaitan. Right? You enjoy such great merits. What did you see? And so Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that whenever I get close to one of the idols, there's a tall white man that appears and he shouts at me, "Step back, Muhammad, do not touch it." And so he never participated in these festivals during the time or before revelation. Al-Hakim narrates with his chain to Zayd ibn Haritha that the Prophet ﷺ never touched an idol even before Allah honored him with that which was honored and which he was honored with and revealed the book to him. Rasulullah ﷺ said that as I grew older, the idols of Quraysh and poetry were made hateful to me. Prophet ﷺ was asked, "Did you ever worship an idol?" And he replied, "No." And they said, "Did you ever drink wine?" And he said, "No." And I always knew that what they practiced was disbelief, although I was not yet knowledgeable of the book or faith. Aisha radiallahu anha narrates that the Messenger ﷺ said, "Once I heard Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufayl." Who is that? Does anybody remember? Who is Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufayl? If y'all remember, way back in like week 3, he was one of the Hunafa. Right? He was one of the people who were monotheists during the time of Jahiliyyah. And so Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufayl, he would degrade the eating of that which was slaughtered for any other than Allah. Thus, I have never tasted anything sacrificed for an idol before Allah. May He be glorified and bestow upon me His image. Okay. Okay, we'll conclude here inshallah, and next week we'll talk about something called the sacrilegious war that happened during the young adulthood of the Prophet ﷺ's life. But before we get to that, inshallah, as many of you know, what transpired over the weekend, there was a massive earthquake that happened in Morocco and Al-Maghrib. Now, news reports are coming out that over 2,000 people have been killed because of this, have died because of this. And it's very heartbreaking, but alhamdulillah, one of the good news is that we can, have comfort in, is that the Prophet ﷺ told us that one of the ways of somebody attaining martyrdom, right, of becoming a shaheed, is that they are crushed by rubble. And the ulama, by and large, say that this applies to earthquakes, right? Earthquakes, because that's what earthquakes cause. So before we conclude, inshallah, I want to just make dua for the people of Morocco and all those who have been affected by this very difficult trial. So, Ya Allah, Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim, Allahumma laka alhamdu kullu, wa laka shukru kullu, wa ilayka yurja'u al-amru kullu, alaniyatu wa sirru, ahlun anta an tu'bad, ahlun anta an tuhmad. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inna kunna min al-zalimin. O Allah, we ask you to have mercy on the victims of the earthquake in Morocco and grant them strength and patience. Ya Allah, we ask you to heal the wounded and have mercy on the deceased and inspire their families and loved ones with patience and solace. Ya Allah, we ask you to protect Morocco and its people from all harm and evil and to keep this country and its people under your intimate care. Ya Allah, Ya Rabbul Alameen. Have mercy on the victims of the earthquake in Morocco and guide their steps in these difficult moments and keep them in your care and protection and grant them strength to face this calamity. Ya Allah, Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim. Alleviate the suffering and hardship of the people of Morocco and forgive the victims, have mercy upon them and grant them a place in your vast paradise. Ya Allah, we turn to you in these challenging moments and we ask you to have mercy on the victims of the earthquake and aid them in rebuilding their homes and lives anew. Ya Allah, Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim. We ask you to heal the wounded, have mercy on the deceased, and grant their families patience and solace, and make this earthquake a means of uniting hearts and strengthening resolve. Ya Allah, you are the one who unites the hearts. We implore you in these challenging moments to bring together the hearts of Muslims and remove differences and divisions amongst us. Ya Allah, Ya Rabbul Alameen, Ya Arhamar Rahimeen. Make this calamity a means for the unity of Muslims and their cooperation in facing adversity. Ya Ahad, the one and only. Unite our hearts in truth and goodness and illuminate our paths with cooperation and love. Allahumma ameen. اللهم إنا نسألك حبك وحب من يحبك وحب كل عمل يقربنا إلى حبك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على سيدنا إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وآل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I know I didn't take questions publicly just because we're running out of time. But if you do have any questions, I'll be here until Isha. So feel free to come up, inshallah ta'ala. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. If you have any questions online as well, feel free to post them online and I'll type an answer if I can as well, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.